Welcome back, WNST and Baltimore Positive. Nothing more positive than being back at Lexington Market. Don Moeller, former Baltimore County executive. I want to give a shout out to all of our sponsors. We will be back in the Ville, and we have big Ville information from Fade
Coming up later this morning,
I think we're going to break some news around here on Baltimore Positive. We'll be back at State Fair as well as Jennings with all sorts of folks. Don, you and I put this thing together a year ago to talk about who will be the next mayor and what the next leadership would be. Mary Miller's here, candidate for mayor of Baltimore. Does that still sound normal? It's only been a couple of weeks since you officially got into this thing, right?
It's exciting.
Well, we've seen you on the television, and, every person I talk to says money, politics, advertising. Who are we? I'm slightly familiar with you. I don't know how much of the electorate here would be. You've obviously served very, very famously in recent years, but the notion of coming back and wanting to run Baltimore, here we are. We're all in it together. We're citizens. We love the city. I think it's awesome that we have a lot of voices talking about this.
Yeah, sure. So good morning to both of you, and it's great to be here in historic Lexington Market, and glad to have the conversation. So I have lived in Baltimore for 34 years, and I love this city, as we all do. And I think we need a change in leadership. I think we need someone who's going to attack this crime problem very forcefully. I think we need someone who's going to drive an economic growth plan for Baltimore that includes everyone. And most of all, I think we need to restore confidence in the leadership of the city. You need someone who's got a lot of integrity and heart and drive to make people proud to live here.
Integrity. Wow, that's the first one, right? So, there's all sorts of issues that we've talked about. I think you're the 6th or 7th candidate we've had on over the last 6 or 7 months. Integrity. To me, as someone who's a taxpayer here, I'm aghast at a lot of this, which is why I've taken my sports station and moved it into this space because I live at the harbor. All of the incompetence, fair enough, but the integrity part. When we had people stealing from us, that's a whole different level that I think there's a stench in the air about corruption and change at this level, and then with what I see down the street. And Don won't let me talk about Donald Trump on here, so we'll keep it to Baltimore. But corruption
only because it exhausts me, man. I'm exhausted by the president. I find this uplifting. I find the president exhausting.
Well, but we feel like we can make a change here locally, and it's up to us. It's up to the citizens. And obviously with the tragedy we had earlier in the week, Baltimore County and Baltimore City and Anne Arundel County, we're about to have a steward on the program in a couple of weeks. We're going to have Barry Glassman in a couple of weeks. So we're trying to reach the whole region, but the epicenter's Baltimore and fixing Baltimore. What has your eyes seen for 34 years here? Tell me about the Baltimore you found and where we are right now.
Sure. I came to Baltimore. Actually, I began working here in 1983 and moved to Baltimore in 1986. But that was a very exciting time for the city. Harbor Place had just opened. It was a great flagship for Baltimore. We felt a very positive vibe about Baltimore. This was a city on the move where there was a lot of positive things going on. And I look at the city today, nearly 40 years later, and we have Harbor Place in receivership. We have a very threatened economy, in my view, in terms of population loss, the potential for losing employers in Baltimore. And we're not investing in our youth. We're not making the sort of investments that are going to get us a very strong future here. So those are the things that I really focus on and think, how can we do better as a city? And I think a big piece of that is new leadership. I had the greatest privilege of my life to go and work for President Obama. And I saw in that role, I was in one of the top jobs at the U.S. Treasury, working after the economic recession, the very deep recession, to bring this country.
Felt more like a collapse to me.
Yes, financial crisis followed by the deepest recession since the Great Depression. And it was an opportunity to work on the comeback, to work on the U.S. economy and to see where can we put investment to get this economy growing again. And we were working on housing finance problems. We were working on small business investment problems. We were looking at a lot of fiscal stimulus to keep the economy from slipping back into a second recession, which was a real risk in 2010 and 11. But it showed me the power of government and how it can do well for its citizens. And it really inspired me to come back to Baltimore and say, what can I do for my hometown? This is where I live. This is the city that gave me such a great opportunity. I didn't start at the top. I started at the bottom. I worked my way up. But I always believed that if you worked hard and you got your education, you could get ahead in life. And I just don't see that happening for enough people in Baltimore. And I think we need to have a game-changing leader who's going to say, we're going to lift this city up, we're going to give people the education they deserve, and we're going to get them real jobs, living wage jobs with benefits that are going to help them succeed in life and give them the security that they deserve. So I think we need a whole new vision for Baltimore and a whole new style of leadership that is really going to bring this place back.
Before, and we want to talk a little bit about your background. We'll get into that in a little while, because one of our themes here is that who people were sort of becomes who they are today. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, you just touched on, and I've watched your commercials, and congratulations on being the first one up with a major media buy. That's quite a coup. But in everything that you put out, Mary, and in your media buys, you just talked about it again, is this concept of investing, and investing in Baltimore, creating jobs, creating economic prosperity. Now, in some form or shape, on every candidate's website, it's going to talk about investing, creating economic opportunity in some shape or form.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners, and if you're in the car, we're sitting with Mary Miller, who wants to be the next mayor of Baltimore. Early vote April 16th. Yeah. Voting starts April 20, or
register vote.
April 28th. Register to vote, because democracy is not
a spectator sport.
There we go. That's our mantra. So, what does Mary Miller's people want to say? They're out there. They're driving around. They're listening. What does your investment look like? In other words, they say, okay, it sounds great. Mary, like everybody else, is saying we're going to invest. What does Mary Miller's plan look like?
Sure. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to bring economic development right into the front office of the mayor. So I would go back to a strong deputy mayor model, but I would create a deputy mayor for economic development that is facing the issues in Baltimore that hold us back from creating jobs and better growth here. And I think part of that is really driving a strong workforce development program. We have lots of good examples around the city of workforce training. We're not connecting them closely enough to the businesses that need employees. And I think the city could play that sort of quarterback role of saying, let's do a better job of connecting our youth, our unemployed adults, and even people returning from prison with the job opportunities. But we've got to get that link built much stronger and do it at much bigger scale. So I think that's one thing a deputy mayor could do. The second thing is, I know as a former business person, you take care of your existing customers because they can be a big source of growth for you. I want to face every employer in this city and say, what do you need? How can we help you? We don't do enough of that, of thanking, celebrating, and helping the people that are already in this city fighting to run their companies. Then I think we can think about organic growth. What's going on with small startups in Baltimore? How can we help a small company become the next T. Rowe Price, the next big employer in the city? When I came to T. Rowe Price in 1983, we had 200 employees. Today that company employs over 7,000 people. But that needs a location, a city, a government that's providing, a great platform for growth. And I just don't feel that we're very hospitable to small employers in this city. And one way we have not helped them is through access to capital. I've done a lot of work looking at our banking system and how small business lending has really dropped in the city, down over a third over the last 10 years.
Is that because people aren't asking for it or not receiving it?
I think it's more not receiving it. I think we've lost a lot of our locally headquartered banks. They've rolled up into large national banks.
So I can't get a loan.
You can't get a loan. They're not interested in making small, locally sit down and negotiate. Higher risk. They may be higher risk. They may not be higher risk, but they are inefficient for a large bank. We need to get more local lenders in place here. It's what I've been working on with Baltimore Community Lending. They have a new nonprofit business lending platform. We're trying to get capital to particularly small businesses run by minorities and women who have not had access to the financial system. So I think we can help, the city can help focus on these issues and say, how can we get more capital available for growth in Baltimore? I think there's some great examples of it, but again, they need to scale. They need to be bigger. I think that, there's a lot we can do with the city in terms of being a good partner, identifying every site that's available for development, making it easier for people to grow in Baltimore. I would love to build a new, much larger small business resource center using the private sector to help. We have a small office now that doesn't have the resources or the people to really be a great, front door for a business that wants to grow. Let's put capital there. Let's put business technical assistance. Let's put all the things that a small business needs.
Well, as a small business owner, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, Don was running Baltimore County government. Sometimes I would sit on the air and say, I need this, a tree fell or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think people are, and Mayor Young came out this week with the pothole thing. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to say, identify pothole, but we all sort of know 311 exists. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I don't call it is, I just figure no one will show up. Like, that is my own.
Yep.
I feel like, it's a pothole, let someone else report that. But from the city's, everything you've mentioned, and when I talk to business owners, especially down in the downtown area, the crime issue, and I live at the harbor, sort of it does. It overshadows everything, not just on the 5 o'clock news, but for every employer in the city, every restaurant in the city. When my wife wants to walk to get her meds down the street in Fed Hill, the concern about crime, whether it's perception or whether it's reality, clearly the numbers state that it is reality, but I think the perception's worse than the reality is.
Can we hold, Nestor, can we hold just for a second on the crime thing? Because I think it's so important we need to talk about it, and I know Mary's released an in-depth plan. I do have one or two quick follow-ups on the financing and the support of small business. I had a small, and you would fall into this category probably, I had a small business person one time say to me, banks are great, Don, here's the model. They lend money to people who don't need it. They lend money to people who don't need it. And I thought, well, that sort of captures it on a PowerPoint slide.
Yep.
So what does Mary Miller, and it's funny, I heard driving in this morning, I hear Mike Bloomberg talking about the work that he did, not taking, not supporting his candidacy here on the air today, but I heard him talk about trying to make capital more available to minorities in New York City who wanted to buy homes, because we know buying homes, first step towards prosperity in the United States. So what does Mary Miller do to bridge that gap between the financial world, which you know like hardly anyone else, and communities where people may be higher risk, but they need capital to get their business? How do you do
Chicken
that,
egg,
Mary?
right?
How do you do that? Right.
Yeah. So Baltimore has a terrible history of redlining, and we know how that has disenfranchised entire neighborhoods in the city, and you just can look at the disinvestment and see what has happened there. I think we need to build some more high-risk lenders who are willing to take more risk. And in the case of the small business lending platform that I'm working with, we do not require collateral. We require a strong business plan. We require a lot of technical support to the business, but we know that collateral is often the obstacle to getting a loan. You asked whether it's a supply problem or a demand problem. I think it is not a demand problem. I think there's plenty of demand in Baltimore for small businesses that want to grow. On the supply side, there have been too many obstacles to doing that. And I think that if we can bring lending institutions to the table and give them an incentive to help capitalize these nonprofit lenders and help them lend into the small business community, we could really change the picture here. And that's something that I have experience doing and I would like to do in Baltimore.
Well, talk about your experience in that, because one of the things Nestor and I are trying to drill down to over and over and over again on the show is, what does the data say? We know it's easy to intuit certain things, but in your experience, in your current role, trying to expand lending to certain communities, what does the data show in terms of the success of taking those risks, or is there enough data to draw a conclusion?
It's the data would show that, first of all, we have a very discouraged demand base in Baltimore. There are too many people who say, I don't even bother asking for a loan because I expect
idea, but I can't execute.
I just don't think it's going to happen for me. So we have that. On the experience of these loans, where it has been done elsewhere, and I've looked at this across the country, you might have a loan loss rate of about 5%. It could be a little higher than that if you have a well-built portfolio of these loans. But we can mitigate that by building capital in that are loan loss reserves that will protect the lender. That's the piece that government can help with. And I think for example, in
Safety
Baltimore...
net?
Yeah, it's a safety net.
Okay.
So we protect the lenders, but we give them the incentives to lend to these harder risk loans and the people that have been shut out of the system.
Now,
We've got to open those doors. Yeah.
In your world, because you speak their language, when you go in a room with the corporate types
Yeah.
and you float these ideas and you ask them to get involved and take these risks, what kind of reaction do you get from the Baltimore business community?
I think there's a lot of heart in the Baltimore business community to change. But there's a lack of confidence in the ability to do that and whether they're going to have a ready partner with the city to do this. And so I think we need to restore that confidence. We're not asking you as a for-profit company to lose money. We're going to build a model that will keep you whole but achieve the goal of getting more credit into the community.
Mary Miller joining us here. We're at Fadley Seafood. We're at Lexington Market. They are remodeling around here and doing all sorts of new stuff. And we talk about investment. I mean, Lexington Market's one of these
That's a
areas
great
that's
story.
been here forever. I'm seeing the fish back here. I'm smelling the crab cakes. We'll get to those later. That this is another one of those areas there. I've lived downtown almost 20 years. We've been waiting, and finally I couldn't get in the side door today because
Right.
they are literally
that's-
doing things here.
Yeah.
Sent me out into the rain today. I like seeing cranes in the sky over in East Baltimore.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
like seeing growth. Downtown Baltimore for you in the growth. I think of sports and I think of baseball and I think of all the things we've seen here. You mentioned 83, the Orioles, and Harbor Place and Camden
Yeah,
Yards.
yeah.
The harbor.
Yeah.
The harbor in downtown, the business community. I know they say the inner harbor and the outer harbor, but what is your vision for downtown and for the inner harbor? Because we talk about receivership. That's literally my neighborhood.
Yep. So downtown is really our flagship. You know, it's the Welcome to Baltimore place. We have got to get Harbor Place back on track. I'd love to go back to the model we saw in the beginning, which was a lot more local enterprises in Harbor Place that make it special, that make it Baltimore. I think if you move to a model where it's national chains, that's not so interesting to people. I know that retail is really suffering in terms of the business model. Maybe we need to reposition it as more of an entertainment center, more dining, less shopping. I'm not a retail expert, but I know we can do that better. And I think that we should have a lot of vision about how we can reopen that place and make it the sort of mecca that it was back in the 80s.
So that lands on your desk, and I know we're coming up against a break, but it's one of the many things that lands on your desk. I know former Mayor Dallas Andrew famously said, you get a pile, take care of that pile today, tomorrow there's another pile, and he more colorfully said that than I am. So on your desk is Harbor Place. What does Mayor Miller do on day one to take a look at Harbor Place and say, all right, we know we got a mess. Here's what I'm going to do to undo this mess and move us in a new direction. What's the mayor do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the mayor should be much more deeply involved in the selection of the manager of Harbor Place, the design for the future project. We own the land that Harbor Place sits on. We should have a much stronger voice in the selection of who's going to be the next operator of Harbor Place and what's going to be there and how does it fit into our broader vision for downtown Baltimore. What do we need? And so I think that's a project that involves talking to the businesses, the residents, all of the people who spend their time downtown and all of the people we want to bring downtown.
I
What do we
go
need?
through them on the weekends, and I see people from literally all over the world. My wife and I walked to Ruth's Chris 3-4 weeks ago, and I remembered saying to her, well, we're at Cheesecake Factory, and we've walked 100 feet. I've heard 10 languages. You know, I mean, literally on any given night, people are coming there looking for what they saw on a postcard. Reputation be damned. They're in Baltimore and they want a crab cake and they want to see the blue water and they want to experience that. I often wonder, do people from White Marsh come? He and I talk all the time about mandatory that my 8-year-old child will come to the aquarium, will come to the science
And they
center.
used to come all of the time.
And again, we go back to the crime, and we'll get to that in a second. But
Right.
that's the blanket. That's the cloud over the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that in segment 2. How about we do that?
Where are we?
We're at Fadley's. We're at Lexington Market. We are in the Charm City, the land of pleasant living. They haven't started the crab cakes yet, but we'll get to that. Mayor candidate, Mary Miller here. We're going to talk about Barack Obama. We're going to talk about government. We're going to be talking about the city. We're going to be talking about crime and all sorts of things. We're going to be eating a crab cake too, right?
A lot going on down here at Fadley, and a big Fadley's announcement later this morning.
It involves Catonsville. Don loves that. We are WNST.net and Baltimore Positive. More with Mary Miller talking about running Baltimore right after this on WNST and Baltimore Positive.